Hello, my name is Bob Fox. I'm the president of the Waynesburg Volunteer Fire Company. It is my pleasure to present these wonder films of the early life in Greene County. These films are the fruits of Mr. Charles Silvius, Greene County's pioneer of motion pictures. Mr. Silvius bought a motion picture camera around the turn of the century and began filming events around Greene County. These films will be shown as local news along with the silent film presented in his theater. Over the years, he accumulated thousands of feet of 35mm film, which his son eventually inherited. In the 1960s, his son retired to Florida, but before doing so, he donated what he called a big volatile mess to the Waynesburg Volunteer Fire Company. These old nitrous films were very flammable and dangerous. In 1969, the fire company appointed a committee of J. Edward Van Cleve, Lou Rush, and Miles Davin to salvage what they could of these deteriorating films. They contacted the archives in Washington, D.C. to see what they could do with the film. The archives were glad to acquire these films, and in return, they transferred these 35mm film to 16mm reels at no cost to the fire company. Of special interest to the archives was the footage of the soldiers going off to Mexico to fight Pancho Villa. As far as we know, no other town in the whole country has such footage. These tapes are narrated by company member Miles Davin. Over the years, as Mr. Davin presented the film, he acquired more and more information about the people and places recorded by Mr. Silvius. Now, the Waynesburg Volunteer Fire Company has transferred the 16mm film to video cassette, and we are proud to make them available to the community. We hope you enjoy this film.
All right, now let's get on with the task of describing as best we can these wonderful old film of Charlie Silvius. This first scene takes place in the year 1913 in Carmichaels, Pennsylvania. It was the National Field Trial for bird dogs. As you can see by the newspaper, a Philadelphia dog won first place. But the local canines didn't do so bad either. You can read about this event in the Citizens Library in Washington, Pennsylvania. Now, isn't that a beautiful animal? Now, here are some of the sports people having lunch. And that person on the right is a lady. And that man is an eater. Here we are at the old county home, across from the Curry home, or the Historical Society building, and they are on the way to market with the cattle, and this is the way they took them to the market in Waynesburg. They walked them down the highway. Now here is the Pittsburgh Pirate baseball game against the House of David. They were a semi-pro team, a religious organization, who were very, very good ball players. And every man on the House of David team had to have a beard. It was their religion. Now this man is a baseball clown whose playing days are over, but he's still entertaining. Here are some of the fans at the ball game and some of the vintage automobiles. Now here we have Waynesburg College football team playing, and football was back in its infancy at the college. As you can see, there aren't, everyone doesn't have equipment. Some of them don't even have helmets on. And notice number 23, there he is on the right. He keeps walking up to the play. I don't know what his job was on the field. But as I said, football was in its infancy, and I guess it had its rough moments. Now it looks like the crowd is going to get into it. They're rougher than the players. Now this scene takes place in West Waynesburg or Bucktown. You can see it's a winter scene, and it's kind of ironic that at this time dozens, even hundreds of children or people skated on 10 Mile Creek. Some people used to come to town for many miles during this time of the year on skates and then skate home. And here you see them on the water company dam, the crest of the dam that's in West Waynesburg. Do you suppose this is a sign of the times, global warming? Because today you don't see anyone at all skating on ice anywhere. Now this is Wash Wood, the local black man who was cut quite a figure in those days, teaching the boys some fancy steps. Now, Estelle Mason came through town with her dog sled team in this manner. Of course, instead of sled, they had sled runners, they had wheels. But she was raising money for some reason on a national scale, and she stopped in town. Now, these are automobile races at the fairgrounds, and as you can see, each automobile had 2 men in them. The job of the second man was to lean into the curve to help keep the car from rolling over. I feel safe to say that they were going maybe 55, 60 miles an hour around that track. But in those days, the top speed on a straightaway was well over 100 miles an hour. Now these are local policemen. That man in the middle is Marshall Wood, the first fire chief of the Waynesburg Fire Company. Here are some of the officers of Company K. This man is Major Martin, who was Waynesburg's first scoutmaster and also the first Burgess of the independent borough of East Waynesburg. Now, this is Sam Weaver blowing the bugle. They're getting ready to go off to Mexico, or to New Mexico, to embark into Mexico to fight Pancho Villa. And here they are going down Washington Street, South Washington Street, to the train station. Now they're being led by some of the town dignitaries here. This year, the year must be 1917. By their dress, it looks like it's getting close to summertime. I was told that that man on the drum there is Henry Fordyce. Yes, you can tell by their backpacks that they're going to fight Pancho Villa. Now here are some, look like some new recruits for Company K. They must be looking them over down at the train station. Now in 1916 they shipped 80 head of horses to Ohio, and this is the method. A man would ride one horse and take along 4 or 5 more with him to Washington, PA, where they put them on a regular gauge railroad for Ohio, because they couldn't ship them on the little W&W railroad. You see, they're going north on Route 19. Here we are, 1916 downtown. People showing off their finery, ladies in their hats. Everyone wore hats in these days. All the women. There are some of the local beautiful ladies of Waynesburg, but all men wore hats. All the ladies wore hats. Young boys wore hats, and when a boy tipped his hat, he stuffed it around his head twice and back on. Now this is history. These are Civil War veterans. You can imagine these men from Waynesburg and local area of Greene County fought in 1865, the Civil War. This is Marshall Wood again. Now these two children, we haven't been able to find out just who they are. Now this is a scene of the barn fires in Waynesburg. The area back of the First Federal Building, or should say the intersection of Franklin and Washington Streets, it was a deep ravine, and they built these barns over them to house horses, especially during the day. People drove horses to work, and they kept them in these barns during the day while they were working. At this time, there was no fire department in Waynesburg, and when you had a fire like this, they ran behind the courthouse where they had a hose reel, and the fire or the policeman or a citizen would get out the hose reel and run it to the closest hydrant to fight the fire. Of course, the hydrants didn't have much pressure, and if the fire was very high or very big, it usually got away from them. And as happened in this case, they lost one barn after the other until eventually all 6 of them were gone at the same fire. And that tombstone place on the corner is still there today. In fact, you could contact Kate Webster, who's still working there today, has been there for many years for tombstones. Now this scene takes place at the fairgrounds. We're going to show some more refinery. See the hats, the styles of the day. Now that lady is smoking a cigar. And here we have ice cream cones. Here we have some more familiar Greene County faces and vintage automobiles. Now here we're panning across the grandstand at the fairground. It was quite a structure, and the county was very proud of it, and they used to fill it up completely back in these days too. This young man was probably a forerunner to the 4-H group. These boys used to come in from all 4 corners of the county during Fair Week and stay the whole week with their animal, even sleeping at night in the stall with them and grooming them and so forth, getting them ready to show. Maybe getting up in the morning, going and hunting for mother and dad, bumming a nickel dime off of them for the day. And then maybe on Friday or Saturday, going back home and to a nice hot bath. Here we have pacer races at the fairground. Now those men look like they're getting ready to put down some bets. Now this is a 217 pace. The man at the archives in Washington, D.C. told us that this was an excellent piece of footage for this time. You can imagine Mr. Sylvius had to aim that camera, focus the lens, and he had to crank the speed of it at what he thought was the right speed. And if he cranked it a little too fast, as he did here, it showed the horses running too fast. And of course, if he cranked it a little too slow, and then they were in slow motion. But the man said for this time, this was an exceptional piece of photography. Now here we have in 1916 on Columbus Day, an oil truck fell through the bridge at Eastview. I imagine he was either driving too slow or stopped on the bridge and suddenly broke through. And you can see the truck is sitting on the rear end of the truck with the front of it sticking up in the air. They probably had quite a time getting that truck out of there. Now here is the building of the Waynesburg Water Company plant for $15,000. Now these days you'd be lucky to get the blueprints done for that price. But you can imagine they built this complete building taking into consideration the gravel, the sand, the Portland, rebar, form lumber, everything that goes into a building of this type, plus labor. It's quite an undertaking for $15,000. And notice that most of the work was all manual labor. Mixed the concrete, wheeled it to the forms and poured it. And of course every crew has to have a happy-go-lucky fellow that you like to have around and always has a smile on his face. You can pick him out of this picture because he can't sit still. Now, the Brave Pump Station explosion in 1917 was quite a catastrophe. When it exploded, Ira Cole and J.W. Cumberledge and John Roop were killed instantly, and Charles Kane and L.J. Cumberledge and Jack Hoskinson were critically injured, and they died that evening. And Harold Wise was sitting astraddle a big-inch pipe at the time. He was thrown over 100 feet into the creek, and he swam ashore with minor injuries. Now this is the building. Those signs aren't on the building anymore because they were sandblasted off back when Bell's Wholesale was in the building. Today, that building is Accurate Brass. This looks like payday in the gas fields at Brave. This looks like 1917 Model T mired in the mud. And this looks like some kind of huckster. We haven't been able to find out who. And that is the Lyle Launce residence near Brave. Now this is an interesting scene. This takes place out by Sycamore on the highway. And notice the man in the white shirt and tie. Back at this time, if you didn't want to pay your taxes or couldn't afford to pay your taxes, you had the option of working them off, which is probably what this man is doing. Now here are some of the bulldozers of the 1915 era. Here goes the old W&W by. Bulldozers in those days consisted of 2 horses and a man and a barrow, or I'd say a wheelless barrow or a scoop, and they would go to the area that they wanted the dirt removed from and scoop the dirt up and take it to the area they wanted to deposit the dirt and just flip it over and deposit the dirt and just go right back up for another load. Now you can imagine how much more efficient a bulldozer is today than many, many horses. This fire took place across from the police station in Waynesburg, where the county commissioners have their office, the county building. And I understand that Sam Smith, the attorney, had an office on the second floor, and by the time the fire started,
He had a large safe in his house. It ended up down in the basement.
that looks like Mrs. Elm from the Elm Brothers Machine Shop family. There you can see he's panning across the ruins there. This is the area where Davis, the tailor, had his tailor shop, and that looks like a Delaney. Now we're panning on across and upward to Waynesburg's skyscraper. And that man on the right is Sam Smith, my neighbor. Well, the cleanup is about to begin, and you can see it's a winter scene. And Marshall Wood, who was also a teamster, had his horses there pulling out. Notice the horses slipping there on the slippery surface. Now they have the safe out. And there is a safe cracker, or the man who knows how to get into the safe. This is in West Waynesburg, in Bucktown, looking westward across the bridge towards Rogersville. As you can see, the water coming up over the road completely. There goes the W&W railroad tracks there, and notice on the right there's a building in the background there. That's the old ice house. This was, back in these days, they cut ice from the creek and stored it in this house and sold it in chunks in the summertime. This predated ice houses, who later manufactured ice in 25, 50, 75 pound blocks for ice boxes. This is the water company building underwater. Here we have the Atlantic Refining Company in West Waynesburg. And that bridge looks across the creek to Emerald Field, the Little League field. And these are South Penn employees going out to the job. And now we're in East Waynesburg at the Double Bridge. I was told by Prexy Stewart one time that there was a man coming into town who was quite inebriated, and when he came to the bridge he thought he was seeing double, so he played safe and tried to drive through the middle. And here we are down in South Waynesburg by the old Ackland Lumber Company. This area has flooded quite a bit over the years. All right, now we're showing the American flag in 1917 draped over the archway. Here we are down in the college field. Soldiers are marching. They're getting ready this time for World War I. As you can see, they're not very well outfitted, so they're gathering new members of the company. I think this was the beginning of subscription for the Army, when all young men had to go to the service. Now here we are up in the north side in the park practicing modern warfare. By that I mean they're moving up by the squad. You have a squad of 7 or 8 men. They move up and then hunker down, and then another 7 or 8 men move up and hunker down, and another 7 or 8 men, and so forth. And by this method, if the enemy fired on them, they would only lose maybe 7 or 8 men. Prior to that, armies met in a meadow of a field and faced each other and just fired at each other. So there's quite a difference in modern warfare. Here we have some lieutenants and corporals. Now we're up on West Street on the north side, practicing marching. Notice the stone block on the left in the background there. That is a mounter for young boys and ladies to mount horses. Here we have Major Martin and Captain Montgomery and Lieutenants Ross and Garrison signing up some new recruits. Major Martin also later became General Martin, then later became Governor Martin, and then later became Senator Martin. And here Company K is in front of the armory on North Washington Street. You can see the street going up to the college in the background is still dirt. And the building in the upper right is the old mill. I took classes in that building in 1951-52. And directly down in front of it is the garage that was Birds and Thrall. Notice the vehicles that come by the scenes that Mr. Sylvia shows here. Half of them are horse and buggy and half are automobile. They had to share the highways or the streets with each other back in these days. When you cross the street, you better be looking down. Here they are on South Washington Street beside the courthouse. They're going to do some calisthenics. You know, it's a shame to think that in these days they took a bunch of young men like this and taught them how to do calisthenics, taught them how to march, taught them how to do the manual of arms, and sent them to camp for maybe a week, teach them how to shoot a gun a little bit. and then send them off to war. Now here we have a corporal showing us the manual of arms. This is the long and the short of Company K and some of the new recruits. Now looking over this man, he looks like he's over 36, so he's too old to be a recruit. This is Mr. and Mrs. Wisecover. He was an oil man, gas and oil man, who took it upon himself to give a going away party for Company K. And here they're shown the whole company going down the steps with a piece of cake in their hands. I only wish that I could give you the names, or at least even the last names of each man going down these steps. If I did, you would probably be able to hear the names of your ancestors from the old history of Greene County. I don't think Mr. Silvius missed one member of Company K there. Now there goes some of the ladies down. And that was Judge Ray. Now this is a choral group singing, but of course this is a silent film, so you can't hear anything. Now, looks like we're going to have a leisurely afternoon in the area. There are some of the lovely young ladies of Waynesburg again. I was told this might be Major Martin's two children. That's Captain Montgomery and Lieutenants Garrison and Ross on each side of him. And there are some of the ladies of Waynesburg. Now here we are going down South Washington Street again, back down to the W&W train station. And this time, Company K is going off to World War I, being led by many of the town dignitaries, families, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, sweethearts. And as you can see, Company K looks better outfitted, looks larger than it was before. So they're on their way to World War I. And if you look closely, you'll notice that there are dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of people there to see them off. I was told that the man sitting up there is Dick Hatfield. Well, there you have it. Company K going off to World War I and France. Bon voyage. Well, the war's over. Now we're going to have an ox roast and a parade. You know, here they go across in front of the Hotel Walton. At this time, this period between the beginning of World War I and the end of World War II was, my estimation, the most patriotic time in the history of this country. Everyone seemed to be patriotic. They covered their floats with the American flag. They carried the American flag. They wore the American flag. They did everything to show off the American flag. All this stuff is supposed to be against the law today. You can't cover a float with a flag. You're supposed to display it in the proper manner and so forth. But these people just had so much pride, they just had to show it off. Now here is Company K walking down the street, accompanied by a bunch of townspeople. Now in the front, in the center there, they're being led by Doc White, the old-time school teacher of Waynesburg, and down in the right-hand corner is Austin Dilley, a long-time employee of Elms Brothers Machine Shop. And here we have Judge Ray giving a speech. Now, Memorial Day 1919, we have another parade being led by our good friends, the Civil War veterans. You realize these men, some of them could have possibly voted for Abraham Lincoln. These are local Greene County men. This parade looks like it took place in Carmichael's. Now there we have our flag being shown hanging under the archway across High Street, our 48-star American flag. Now the big parade that followed looked like there were many units, so they were probably from the surrounding counties and areas. You can see there's a band, American Red Cross. And you can see there are booths set up there in front of the courthouse. So after the parade, they're going to have some fun and games. But notice the people. They're celebrating the great victory, the great victory in Europe of World War I. But they're not too happy. Do you suppose it could be because Company K lost the complement, half of the complement of the company in one afternoon in France? I always picked out Company K by the tall and the short of it. There's the tall, so that must be Company K. Looks a lot smaller than it did when it left. There's some more bands. Fraternal Order of Eagles. Well, the parade's over, and now we're going to have some fun and games. Doesn't look like they have too many takers, though. The crowd is just not in the mood. Now, the speakers of the day were usually high-ranking service personnel, local politicians. This scene takes place up in the park. Now here we have some floats from Carmichael. And it looks like the parade took place in Carmichael's too. More Red Cross personnel. And of course, what would a parade be without Uncle Sam and Mrs. Liberty? Now this scene looks like some local children from the Waynesburg area schools. I say that because it looks like they're in classes. They have teachers with them. The children look all dressed up, showing off their finest. Of course, all boys have hats on. And girls, if they didn't have hats on, they had ribbons in their hair. Usually very large ribbons. It looks like they're coming down West Street and turning up onto High Street. Now here we have Grangemen. Back at this time, every small hamlet in town, like Rogersville, had a Grange Hall in it. You name the town or what have you, and there was a grain hall there, a Grange Hall, with plenty of local or loyal men from the Grange. There's Coontown, Mount Morris, here we are down to College Field, and it looks like they're doing some high jumping. They're using what we call the scissors kick in those days. So here we have a relay race. Notice that some of the young men are dressed in street clothes. They still have their shirt and ties on. This is probably the basketball team from the college. This is down by the train station again at the Jacobs house, which is right across the street. Mr. Jacobs used to build some very exquisite birdhouses. He sold them all over the country. And here they're showing the process of raising one up. He was the father of Harold Jacobs and Brian Jacobs. Now here we have a rally. The high school team is going to have a rally. They're going to have a big football game. This is billed as the biggest game of the year against Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Now we're going to have some cheerleading. Of course, the cheerleaders back in those days were boys. Best game of the season, the sign says. I guess he wants to be known as the Dunce. Now this is an oil well. The county at that time was pocked with many, many oil wells. Here we have some children at, it looks like a birthday party because it looks like it's taking place at a house, and children are different ages, and they seem to be in a party mood. Now these are some the judges stand at the fairground. So it looks like they're going to have another pacer race. This time, the time is 2:15 and a half. Now we're showing some more Greene County faces. So look carefully, you may see a relative. Here we have a line of vintage automobiles, probably at a sporting event. This looks like some automobiles are being delivered in the area of Waynesburg. Do you suppose they could be going to Fox Auto Sales? Well, they look more like Buicks. Maybe they're going to the Ingram garage, Ingram Buick, down by the Triangle that later became Puglia Buick. This looks like some kind of picnic in the outdoors. Yes, that looks like the entrance to the Ingram garage. Well, seems like we're going to have another parade here. We're back in front of the Hotel Walton. As you can see, patriotism was in its full bloom. Now here we are at Mather. Mather had a terrible explosion on May 19th, 1928. And it killed off the 1/4 of the male population of Mather in that explosion. There were 194 men killed. That means instantly there were 94 widows. And, of course, 498 children suddenly found themselves without a father. The collieries closed at that time, and they reopened a few months later in 1928. But then in 1964, they closed down for good. This is showing some of the collieries, and this man must be the superintendent of the collieries, and that must be some office personnel there with him. Now this is some more footage of the family again. Well, here we are back on North Washington Street, doing some marching. Here we have another parade being led by some of the old Civil War veterans again. Now we're back down at College Field looking at some distance races. Here we have some long jumping, or as it was known in those days, broad jumping. And some more good Greene County faces. Better keep looking you're liable to miss a relative. It looks like father and son. There's a Bronson type face. This is history too. This scene takes place in 1913. This man flew down from Washington, PA, some 20 miles. You know, the Wright brothers flew in 1903, and here we are 10 years later. This plane must be a model somewhere between 03 and 13, so we don't know what year it is. But Mr. Silvius is showing the wings of it, and here you can see the bottom wing, but you can't see the top wing, and he's shown operating the ailerons in between. But Mr. Silvius is taking his time going across them to show you how it works. As you see, the man sitting on the front of the plane with his hat on backwards and knickers, and it's just like the new ultralight planes. In the back you can see the engine and the prop. Now we have another parade in front of the courthouse. This is probably in 1919. This seems to be a parade where everyone's getting into it. The servicemen, local people, teenagers, even the tiny tots are into it. That sign says "Farm or Arm." That was the slogan for World War I. The same as the slogan for World War II was "Rosie the Riveter." Now we have some more football from Waynesburg College. Now here we have the serpent dance, or the snake dance. So we must have won the game, or else it's halftime. Well, it must have been halftime because we have some more football. This is a Charlie Chaplin doll. Charlie Chaplin was a star of the silent film era. We're back out the fair again. Look closely for those relatives. Now this is not a left-hand fiddler. It appears that our reel got turned around backwards. As you can see, these musicians are playing with their left hand. So from here on, the film is backwards. But we have a parade here in front of the fairgrounds, grandstands. What a way to watch a parade, to have beautiful animals like this trotted by you. Prize-looking animals there. This looks like the Wisecover family again. At the Wisecover house. This is the billiards, opera billiards building being built in downtown Waynesburg. That's the building that Stetz and Hardesty have their office in. We have some more Greene County faces. Now this is a line of trucks, as we called them in those days. Looks like a huge load of lumber being shipped to a job. And this is the way they did it. 2 horses and a wagon pulling that heavy load. And that man in the back, you see his hand on the brake, and that's to help going down hills, to help hold the load back. This boy is doing the Charlie Chaplin walk. Looks like they're going to pull the old empty wallet trick. Give a man a chew and he just takes the whole thing. Now this is a gentleman horse. He's standing there waiting for the lady to cross the street and then proceeds on. Isn't that an angelic looking face? Oh, more empty wallets. Now here we are raising some more birdhouses for Mr. Jacobs. You know, there were many, many mansions in the northeastern part of the United States that were adorned by Mr. Jacobs' birdhouses. As you can see, it took a lot of manpower to raise one. Now here we are back out the fairgrounds, panning out in the infield there. Oh look, there's a bi-wing tail dragger landing inside the fairgrounds. This is Mrs. Elms again. Do you suppose that young fellow sitting on her lap could be J. Edward Van Cleve, longtime owner of Elm Brothers Machine Shop? This must be some kind of drag your partner along race. Back in these days, you didn't have to have a driver's license to drive an automobile. If you could start it, you got in it, drove off. Now in 1925, on December 23rd, Downey House had a very devastating fire. It was a very blistery day, and the fire started in a restaurant on the southeast end of the block and ran northwest to the end of the block where the small 5 and 10 is. Some men were on the roof fighting the fire when about 40 feet of the wall of the Sylvius building collapsed on them, killing 4 and injuring 5. Those that were killed were Joseph Riffenberg, James Thurman Long, Harvey Call, and William Finch. And Victor H. Sylvius was critically injured that day, and he died that evening. But the others who were injured were Clovis Wright, who later became fire chief of the fire company, Luther Renner, who still today is a lifetime member of the Volunteer Fire Company, and Harry Wilbert and Odell Cooper. Fire also jumped across to General Green in the courthouse, burning the statue and the cupola and on downward and across to destroy the First Presbyterian Church, which is where the Observer Publishing building is now. About 10 companies assisted from as far away as Washington and Charleroi. Some townspeople met the following month and decided that we here in Waynesburg were going to have a fire company, and that we were going to buy a fire truck just like that one that came down from Washington to help us fight that devastating fire. Well, they did form the Waynesburg Volunteer Fire Company, and we did buy a 1925 LaFrance, just like Washington's. That truck today is still the pride of our company. On behalf of the Waynesburg Volunteer Fire Company, we wish you a good day and be careful with those matches.